Please, I haven't eaten since yesterday. Just a little bread. She said it from the curb, and the traffic almost swallowed it. Torn gray coat, chestnut hair tangled, yesterday's rain still in it. A backpack she held the way you hold the last thing you own. From inside his truck, Terrence Boyd watched 3 people in good coats walk past her without slowing down. One of them crossed the street. Terry had $41 in his pocket and 11 days before he lost the garage and the room above it. His 8-year-old tugged his sleeve. "Dad, she's still standing there." She could have asked him for money. She asked for bread instead. 9 days later, that one word was the only reason his daughter still had a roof over her head. So why does a woman who owns half this city ask a broke mechanic for a piece of bread? Stay with me on this one. It goes somewhere you won't see coming. And if stories like this are the reason you're here, hit subscribe before we start. It costs you nothing and it keeps these coming. Terry parked the truck a half block down because the meters ran cheaper past the intersection, and that was the kind of math he did now, without noticing he was doing it. He came around the hood with 2 grocery bags hanging off one arm. Zuri came around the other side with the small bag, the one with the eggs in it, because she'd asked for a job, and he'd given her the job with the least weight and the most responsibility. She stopped on the sidewalk and pointed. "Dad, that lady." He'd already seen her. He'd seen her from the light 2 blocks back, standing at the corner in a gray coat that had split along one shoulder seam, and he had spent the whole crawl through traffic doing arithmetic he didn't want to finish. $41, 11 days. A rent notice on his roll-up door he hadn't taken down because taking it down felt like agreeing with it. The woman's hands were pressed together in front of her, not folded in prayer, just held the way people hold their hands when they've run out of things to do with them. As they came level with her, she lifted her head. "Sir." Terry stopped walking. Zuri stopped a half step behind him, still holding the eggs. The woman's voice came out low and even and worn smooth, like she'd sanded the shake out of it on purpose. "Not money, just bread." She said it the way a person says a line they've practiced in the reflection of a bus window, flat quick before anybody can interrupt it. Terry looked at the bags in his hand. Then he looked at the food truck idling at the curb behind her, and at Yusuf leaning in the service window with a towel over his shoulder, watching the whole thing the way he watched everything on that corner. Terry walked over without saying anything at all. He came back a minute later with a hot sandwich in foil, 2 rolls, a bottle of water, and an apple, and he put them into her hands, carefully, like he was handing over something that might come apart. That was $19. $19 was the gas he'd budgeted for the week, which meant he would be walking the last 2 legs of his Thursday job, and he did that calculation while he was still standing there, and he handed the food over anyway. The woman held it and didn't move. She stared at the foil like she was waiting for someone to take it back. "Thank you," she said. Her sleeve had slid up when she reached out. On the inside of her left wrist, there was a band of skin 2 shades paler than the rest of her arm. A clean stripe, sharp-edged, the exact width of a watch she wasn't wearing anymore. Terry saw it. He didn't ask. She shifted the bundle against her chest. "There's one more thing." He waited. "Anywhere dry," she said. "I'll be gone before your daughter wakes up," and that was where it stopped. "Ma'am, I've got an 8-year-old asleep in that house by 7. He heard the sentence come out of his own mouth, and he didn't like the sound of it, and he kept going anyway because the second half was the true half. I don't get to be wrong about people, not with her." The woman nodded before he'd finished. Not slowly, immediately, like she'd been waiting for the shape of that answer and had only been curious which words he'd use. "I understand," she said. "You've already done more than most." Terry stood there another second, working his jaw, trying to find the thing that came after that. He didn't find it. He took Zuri's hand and walked. His daughter looked back over her shoulder the whole way to the truck. Behind them, the woman sat down on the bench beside the shelter. She unfolded nothing. She opened nothing. She held the loaf against her chest with both arms, and she did not eat. Boyd Auto was 2 bays on Halstead with a room above it, and the room above it was where Terry and his daughter slept, which is a detail that matters later and did not feel like a detail at the time. There were 2 notices taped to the roll-up door. The one on the left had his name on it. Rent adjusted upward, term shortened, balance due in full. The one on the right was for the body shop next door. 5-year renewal, rate held, same property manager. Same signature at the bottom of both, same month. Terry unlocked the padlock, rolled the door up, and neither of those pieces of paper got said out loud by anybody that day or any day after. The number on the left-hand notice was $14,600. He had 11 days. There was a second number, and it lived in a drawer in the kitchen upstairs under a rubber band. $2,700, emergency room the night Zuri's asthma went sideways in February, past due. It had stopped being a bill and turned into a piece of mail he moved from one surface to another. On the back wall of the first bay, his father's tools hung on a pegboard in the order his father had hung them, and Terry had never once reorganized them. Zuri set the eggs on the workbench and got out the camera. It was her mother's, a squat little digital thing 8 years old with a cracked corner and a wrist strap that had gone gray. She photographed everything. The oil drums, the calendar, a sparrow on the fence rail, her own shoe. "You're going to kill that battery before Sunday." She lined up a shot of the pegboard and took it anyway. "Then you'll charge it," she said without looking up. He let that one go because she was right, and because she'd inherited the last word from a woman who'd never once given it up either. They didn't talk for the first 6 blocks. Terry kept his eyes on the road and his hands at 10 and 2 and thought about foil and how warm it had been when he handed it over and how long a hot sandwich stays hot on a bench in October. "We still have Mom's room, Dad." He didn't look over. "That room stays closed, baby." Zuri turned her face toward the window. Out there, the streetlights had started coming on early, the way they do when the sky goes low and green in the afternoon. "Is it because she's homeless?" He opened his mouth. Nothing usable came out, so he closed it again. "Is it because she's a stranger?" "It's not that simple." He heard how thin it sounded. So did she. She was 8, not stupid. She put her forehead against the glass, and when she spoke again, her voice had gone down to almost nothing, and it wasn't an argument anymore. It was just a question. What if Mom had been the one standing there? Terry's hands closed on the wheel until the leather creaked. He didn't answer her. They both knew that was the answer. The storm came in a little after 9. It announced itself the way storms do in that part of the city, one long roll of thunder that you feel in the floor before you hear it, and then the rain arriving all at once, like somebody had upended something. Terry stood at the window over the garage with the lights off behind him and watched the street turn to metal. Zuri was asleep. He'd tucked her in. She'd asked whether the lady found somewhere warm, and he'd said he hoped so, and she'd accepted that because she was a kid and she still believed the things her father told her. He stood there for 11 minutes. Then he took his keys off the hook. The corner was empty. The bench was empty. He got out anyway and stood in it and let it soak him through the shoulders while he turned in a slow circle, and there was nothing on that corner but water moving sideways. A man pushing a trash barrel under the awning told him someone matching that description had gone up toward the old bus terminal. Terry found her there, and he found her by her shoes. They were sitting outside the doorway of the shelter on the dry side of the threshold set down neatly on the concrete. Both of them wiped clean of mud, both of them squared up side by side, toes pointed the same direction. A woman with nothing had stopped in the rain to clean her shoes before stepping into somewhere that wasn't even hers. Terry looked at those 2 shoes a lot longer than he needed to. Then he went around the pillar. She was curled against the wall with her back to the concrete, soaked straight through her coat gone black with water. The foil bundle sat on the ground beside her, still folded shut. "You didn't eat it?" She opened her eyes slowly, not like someone waking up, like someone coming back from a long way off. "I was saving it." He crouched down and picked it up. The bread inside had gone to paste. He carried it 3 steps and dropped it in the barrel by the wall, and he heard her go quiet behind him in a particular way. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't do that." He pulled his jacket off and held it out. She looked at it and didn't take it. "I'll ruin it." "It's already ruined." She took it with both hands and her hands were shaking, and neither of them mentioned that either. The heater in the truck ran loud and ran hot, and Terry put it on full. She held her hands up toward the vent, but she kept them a few inches short of it, hovering, like getting too close to warm air was a thing she'd gotten out of the habit of. He pulled out onto the wet road before he said it. "One night. That's it." He glanced over, then back at the windshield. "And I don't take a dime from you. Not from you, not from anybody standing behind you. That's the whole deal." "I understand." She said it fast. Faster than a person agrees to something. Fast enough that Terry understood she'd heard some version of that sentence before from somebody somewhere and had learned the correct speed to answer it. They rode 4 blocks without talking. "I'm Terry," he said finally. She watched the wipers. "Elise. My daughter's Zuri. She's 8, and she asks about 40 questions a day, so I'd get some sleep tonight if I were you." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not a laugh, but the place a laugh comes from. The porch light was on when they pulled in. Terry sat with his hand on the key for a second longer than he needed to. "I've never done this before," he said. "I want that on the record." "I know." He unlocked the door and got it open quiet, and he had one foot in the hallway when a voice came down from the top of the stairs. "I knew you'd go back." Zuri was standing on the landing in her pajamas with the bear under one arm and her hair flattened on one side. "You were supposed to be asleep." "I was." She came down 2 steps. Then it started raining. Elise stood very still in the doorway with the rain still coming off her sleeves onto the mat. "I left the light on for her," Zuri said. Later, when the house had gone quiet and Terry came back up the hall to check the locks, the guest room door was open a few inches. The bed was turned down and untouched. Elise was sitting on the floor beside it, her back against the frame, the borrowed jacket folded across her knees. Terry stood there a moment. Then he switched off the hall light and went to bed, and he didn't ask her why. She was gone before he up. The bed was made so tight you could have bounced a coin off it. The jacket was folded into a square on the dining table, dried and brushed clean, the collar squared to the edge like it had been set with a ruler. There was a note on top of it, 4 words long. "Tell your daughter she was right about the light, E." Terry read it twice. Then he went through the house the way you do when you've let a stranger in and you're ashamed of yourself for checking. The cash tin was where it lived. The tools were where his father had hung them. The camera was on the workbench with the strap coiled beside it. What was missing was 1 loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. Zuri came down the stairs at a run and stopped when she saw his face. "She left." He handed her the note. She read it with her lips moving. She didn't even say goodbye. She looked at the front door like it might reconsider, then she frowned. Dad. Was she still hungry? Terry looked out through the kitchen window at the roll-up door and the 2 notices on it sitting side by side in the morning light. I think she met somebody who was. That was a Tuesday morning. At 8:45, while Terry was underneath a Buick with a wrench in his teeth, a black SUV pulled up across from the garage and stopped. It didn't idle. Whoever was driving it shut the engine off. It sat there for 4 or 5 minutes with the windows dark, and nobody got out and nobody got in. Then it started up again and pulled away. Nobody said anything about it. Yusuf Damir had run the same food truck on that corner for 9 years and had opinions about everyone who walked past it. When Terry came by at noon, Yusuf leaned out of the window before he'd even ordered. "Your lady came by this morning." "She's not my lady." "Fine, the lady you fed." Yusuf wiped his hands on the towel. "She asked me for a cup of hot water." Terry stopped with his hand on the counter. "Hot water. No money for coffee, so I gave her the coffee and she was very unhappy about it." He tipped his chin toward the far sidewalk. "Then she took the bread across the street." There was an old man who slept in the doorway of a shuttered pharmacy 2 doors down and had for most of that year. His name was Nathaniel Pryor, and everybody on the block called him Nate, and nobody on the block knew his last name. He hadn't been able to get up off the ground on his own for a week. Yusuf described it in the flat way a man describes a thing he's still turning over. She had crouched down in front of Nate. She'd broken the loaf in half with both hands, and then she had given him both halves, not one, and one both, and folded his fingers around them. What she kept was the heel, the dry end, the part you throw at ducks. I have watched 1,000 people ask this city for help. Yusuf folded the towel over his shoulder. I have never once watched somebody with nothing hand out everything she had. Terry paid for his sandwich and stood there eating none of it. He had the parts invoice in his jacket pocket from the supplier run that morning, and he pulled it out and flattened it on the counter because Yusuf's cousin sold the same brake sets cheaper, and Terry wanted to know how much cheaper. He didn't notice her come back up the sidewalk. Neither of them did. She stopped maybe 4 feet off at the edge of the awning, holding the crust in one hand, and her eyes went across that invoice upside down. The way a person reads a page that's facing the wrong way when reading pages is what they used to do all day. 2 words. It's wrong. Terry looked up. What is... But she'd already turned her face away toward the traffic, and whatever had been open in it a second ago was shut, and she didn't say anything else at all. Terry found Nate the next morning under the bus shelter with his back against the schedule board and a paper cup of Yusuf's coffee going cold beside him. The old man had a notebook open on his knee. Black leatherette cover split along the spine and taped. He was writing in it with a golf pencil. You're looking for her. I'm looking for her. She doesn't stay put. Nate licked the pencil and wrote something. When she wants to be gone, she goes to the church at the end of the block and sits in the back and looks at the window with the boat in it. Terry glanced down at the page. It was all numbers, column after column of them, dated 6 or 7 a day. What is that? Nate turned it toward him without embarrassment. Plates, license plates, hundreds of them, going back weeks. 30 years driving a school bus, he said. You write down plates or you lose the habit. And a man my age doesn't get to pick which habits he keeps. He said it lightly. He looked at Terry while he said it, looked at him a second longer than the sentence needed, with his head tipped slightly the way you look at a face you're trying to place. Terry, who had a woman to find and a rent notice on his door, said thank you and left. Nate watched him go and went back to his numbers. She was on the bench by the shelter that afternoon with the backpack between her feet. Terry sat down at the far end of it, which was as close as he judged he'd earned, and for a while, neither of them worked very hard at talking. Then a black SUV came up the block slow and stopped 20 yards past them, and its brake lights stayed on. Elise went rigid beside him, not dramatically. Her shoulders just came up an inch and stopped moving. Don't look at him. Terry noticed the pronoun. She hadn't said them. The passenger door opened and a man got out, silver hair cut close, gray overcoat, no umbrella, in no hurry whatsoever. He crossed the sidewalk and stopped a respectful distance from the bench, and he didn't look at Elise first. He looked at Terry. Boyd Auto, 2 bays on Halstead, is that right? He said it the way people say a thing they've read carefully, rather than a thing they've just learned. Terry didn't answer him. My father drove a wagon that a shop like yours kept running for 19 years, the man said. Nobody sends a card to the man who does that. I've always thought that was a failure of manners. He reached into his coat, and Terry's whole body got ready for something, and what came out was a business card. The man held it out with both hands the way you'd hand somebody a document. Warren Kessler, I'm not here to take anything from anyone. I'd like you to have that. And when she frightens you, and she will, I'd like you to call me. That was all of it. He nodded to Elise, who had not lifted her head, and he said her name once quietly, the way you'd greet somebody at a funeral. Then he walked back to the car and got in, and the car pulled out into traffic and was gone. Terry sat there holding the card. It was heavy stock, 1 name, 1 number, nothing else on the front. He turned it over out of reflex. On the back in blue pen, somebody had written the date. The habit of a man who keeps a record of every time he meets somebody. Terry put it in his shirt pocket and thought nothing else about it, and beside him, Elise was breathing like a person who had just carried something up a flight of stairs. The church at the end of the block was open and mostly empty. There was a window at the far end with a boat in it, and she was sitting in the last row underneath it. She didn't act surprised. Terry sat down and gave it about 4 seconds. Who was that man? She kept her eyes on the glass. They're not looking for me, Terry. She folded her hands in her lap and set them there. They're looking for a signature. He waited. He gave it a good long while. Whose? She didn't answer that, and she didn't get up, and she didn't apologize for not answering, and after a minute Terry understood that she wasn't going to, and that she wasn't going to sit there feeling bad about it either. So he was the one who stood up. He was the one who walked out. She had left the backpack in the corner of the second bay. She'd left it the way she left everything, set upright, straps squared against the wall where it wouldn't be underfoot. Terry looked at it for most of a day before he opened it. Inside, a rolled sweater, a comb, a plastic bag of receipts, flattened and stacked. He tried 3 things and 2 of them went nowhere. The first was a laundry receipt with a phone number written across the top corner in pen. He dialed it standing under the lift with grease to the elbow and got the 3 tones and the recording. Disconnected. Not reassigned disconnected, which is a different thing and means somebody chose it. The second took him 40 minutes across town to a women's shelter with a sign-in book on a clipboard. He paid for that trip in gas he'd already spent once. The staff were kind about it. They let him look. She was in there. 4 nights in September in careful block capitals, Ellie Marsh, no ID, no case file, no forwarding. The woman at the desk said she remembered the name and not the face, which after a while is what happens to everybody in that book. Terry drove back with nothing. The third thing he wasn't looking for at all. It was in the small inner pocket, the one he'd already checked, and hadn't emptied a key fob, black plastic dead battery, the kind that opens a parking structure. He was turning it over in his fingers, not thinking, and on the back of it there was a stamped mark, a letter V set inside a diamond. He knew that mark. He'd known it for 2 years. He knew it the way you know the shape of a doorknob in your own house. He turned around. Stacked against the back wall of the first bay 4 high were the parts crates that came in on the supplier truck every Thursday. Same V, same diamond. Stamp into the side of every single one of them. Terry stood in the middle of his own garage holding a dead key fob and did not move for a while. Then he went and found Nate. The old man didn't ask what for. He turned the notebook around on his knee and let Terry read it, and Terry found the SUV in about 90 seconds because Nate wrote in columns and dated everything. But it was the second thing on the page that did it, and Terry only caught it because Terry was a mechanic, and mechanics look at the parts of a car civilians walk past their whole lives. Below the plate, Nate had copied a short alphanumeric string. He'd written it because it was there, and because he wrote everything. It was the asset number. Stamped into the rear quarter panel load, where a fleet stamps its own vehicles so a yard can tell them apart. It began with the same 3 characters as the crates. Where'd you see this one? 4th and Belmont, September. Terry looked up. Nate, this is dated 5 weeks ago. Sure. Nate turned the page and turned another one. It's in here 4 more times. 4th and Belmont, under the freeway on Vane, the lot behind the Mission on 62nd, the Mission on 62nd again. Every one of those was a place people sleep when they have nowhere. Every one of those dates was weeks before Terry Boyd ever handed a woman a sandwich on a street corner. Terry lifted his head to say her name. The roll-up door was open a hand's width at the bottom. He hadn't opened it. The backpack was still against the wall where she'd set it, straps squared upright. It took him 4 days to work out who she was. It took him about 4 seconds to understand that wasn't the important question anymore. The board met that Thursday. Thursday was day 8. Remember that number. Warren Kessler came to the garage on Friday morning and brought 2 coffees. He didn't come in past the threshold until Terry waved him in. He stood in the first bay in a gray overcoat with his shoes going dark at the toes from the wet concrete, and he looked at the pegboard on the back wall for a long moment. Whoever set that up did it in the order he used them, not by size. My father. It shows. Then Kessler put one of the coffees on the workbench and told him without any drama at all exactly where things stood. 3 people who had worked alongside Elise Vandermeer for years had already signed statements. They'd signed the week before. One of them was a woman named Corinne Delaney, who had run a department under her for 6 years. The statements described a woman on a sidewalk in torn clothes, dirty, asking strangers for food. None of it was invented. That was the part Terry kept coming back to later. 3 people already signed. Kessler turned the coffee cup a half rotation on the bench so the seam faced away from him. I don't need a 4th. He let that sit. What I need is the one man in this city who can say she was fine to say it in my words instead of hers. Then he laid out the arrangement, and he laid it out like a man reading a weather report. His fund would purchase the lease on the property outright. The arrears, all 14,600 of it, cleared on signature. The rate held for 5 years. There would be attorneys. There would be paper. There would be nothing in it that a court would blink at because there was nothing in it that was against the law. In exchange, Terry would give a statement describing the 9 days he had just lived through. I'm not asking you to lie about her. Kessler set a pen down on the bench and turned it so the nib pointed at Terry. I'm asking you to sign what you actually saw, and here is the thing Terry couldn't get around then or later. A woman who slept on the floor beside a made bed. A woman who wouldn't eat a sandwich because she was saving it. A woman who left before sunrise without saying goodbye and took nothing but bread. Every one of those sentences was true. He didn't sign it. He also didn't tear it up. He folded the page along the crease that was already in it, put it in his shirt pocket behind the business card, and said he needed to think. Kessler thanked him for his time and complimented the shop again on the way out, and meant it. She was sitting on an upturned crate outside the roll-up door that afternoon, doing homework on her knees because she liked the noise of the street better than the quiet upstairs. A man in a gray overcoat stopped on the sidewalk and said hello and asked how her day had been and said please when he asked his question. He already knew the address. He'd said it out loud on a bench 2 days earlier, 2 bays on Halsted, so that wasn't what she gave him. She sleeps in the room upstairs, Zuri said. Terry got it out of her that night, not by shouting, he didn't shout, but by sitting down across from her at the kitchen table and asking her to describe the car. She described the car very well. Dark, big. The man had gotten back into the passenger side, not the driver's side, and she'd thought that was interesting. Then her face came apart. He said, "Please, Dad." She didn't cry. She put her hands flat on the table and looked at them. She didn't take a single photograph for 2 days after that. And that is the reason that the next time anyone came looking for Elise Vandermeer, nobody had to look anywhere at all. On Saturday, Terry loaded a sealed box of brake sets into the truck and drove it back to the supplier and stood at the returns counter for 20 minutes to get cash instead of credit. He lost a booked job doing it. A transmission flush at 11, a regular. A man who did not reschedule. Here is what that came to. $19 on the corner, $6 of gas to the shelter across town and back, $11 for the soup he brought to the bench on Wednesday, $9 for the second sandwich, $45, near enough, which was almost exactly what he cleared standing at that counter on parts he'd already paid for. He didn't tell anybody about it, and he didn't feel noble about it, and there is no speech here. It was just the arithmetic. He did it in the truck with the engine off, and then he drove home. She came back on Sunday night. She stood outside the roll-up door in the rain in the same gray coat, and it was Zuri who got to the door first because Zuri had been watching the street through the front window for 6 days. Nobody made a speech about it. Terry put the kettle on. Elise sat at the kitchen table with a towel around her shoulders and answered about a third of what was asked her. Monday morning, the lease portal showed a status Terry had never seen on it. Paid in full. He refreshed it twice. Then he called the hospital billing line on a hunch he couldn't have explained and sat on hold for 9 minutes to be told that the outstanding balance on the account had been settled on Friday by a third party who had asked to remain anonymous. "A benefactor," the woman on the phone said, and she sounded pleased about it. That night was a good night. That is the part that matters. Zuri talked through the whole meal without stopping once. Elise ate everything on her plate, which she hadn't done since she'd arrived, and at one point she laughed at something an 8-year-old said about a substitute teacher, and it was a real laugh, and it went on slightly too long, the way laughing does when a person is out of practice. Afterward, Terry went down and rolled the door up halfway and stood there in the cold with the receipt printout in his hand. He taped it over the rent notice, right over it, squared to the edges. For about 11 hours, Terrence Boyd thought he had gotten away with something. Elise picked up the printout on Tuesday morning. She did it on reflex, the same reflex as the invoice on Yusuf's counter, the same tilt of the head, the same 2 seconds. It's wrong. Terry stopped with the coffee pot in his hand because those were the same 3 words in the same voice, and he'd learned by then to take them seriously. She turned the paper around. On the payer line, there were 4 initials. Not a bank, not a charity, the abbreviation of a private fund one she had signed her name under a few hundred times in another life. Back when signing things was what she did between 8 and 7. And the settlement date on the hospital account was Friday. Friday was the morning a man in a gray overcoat had stood in the first bay and complimented his father's pegboard. The money had gone out before the offer was ever made. Before the pen was set on the bench, before I'm not asking you to lie about her. Terry set the pot down. Here is the part he would think about for a long time afterward, and it wasn't the money. "I looked at that paper for a full minute," he said. He didn't look at her while he said it. He looked at the window. And the only thing I felt was relief. He'd made one rule, not a dime, not from her, not from anybody standing behind her. And he'd seen 2 words on a screen, and he had not asked a single question about where they came from because he hadn't wanted to know. Elise folded the printout into quarters and set it on the table between them. "They'll have a record of every dollar," she said. That was always the point of it. A man who takes help from one side is not a witness anymore, he's a party. Terry asked her the only thing left to ask, which was why she hadn't gone back 6 months ago, or 6 weeks ago, or on any of the days since. "I'm not going back because you found something." She squared the folded paper to the edge of the table with one finger. "I'm going back because Thursday is the first day they have to let me speak." That afternoon, Terry rolled the door down at 2 in the afternoon for the first time in 9 years of business. Nate Pryor came to the garage on Wednesday evening, which nobody expected because Nate did not leave that block. He'd walked it. It had taken him most of 2 hours, and he was gray in the face when he got there, and he waved off the chair until he'd said what he came to say. He held out the notebook. "You keep it. I've got no use for a record nobody reads." Terry took it and turned it over in his hands, and it weighed nothing, and it was the heaviest thing anybody handed him that whole week. Then Nate said something that had nothing to do with any of it. He said the name of a street on the west side. He said it plainly, the way you'd read it off a sign. And then he said a number, a 2-digit number, the number of a bus route that had stopped running before Zuri was born. Terry looked up. "That was my stop," he said. "That was my corner when I was 8 years old." "I know it was." You were the small one with the blue lunchbox and the tape on it." Nate lowered himself onto the crate at last, slowly, one hand on the workbench. "Your grandmother had you Tuesdays and Thursdays. The other days you stood there about 20 minutes past everybody else." Terry didn't say anything. "I remember every kid who never had someone waiting at the stop." Terry stood in his own garage with a notebook in his hand and looked at an old man he had walked past every day for a year, and it took him a long time to put his hand out. Nate shook it like it was nothing. That's the part that got him. Upstairs later, Elise sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in front of her that she didn't drink. Terry asked her the question he'd been carrying since the corner. Not who she was, he had that. The other one, why bread? She thought about it for a while. Money tells you what people can spare. She turned the cup a quarter turn on the table and didn't lift it. Food tells you whether they think I'm worth feeding. Then Zuri came in her pajamas and put the camera down on the table beside her father's hand without a word and went back to bed. He turned it on. The last picture on it was from Sunday night. The three of them at that table, taken from low down and slightly crooked because she'd held it at arm's length and guessed. It was the first photograph she'd taken in 2 days. They gave her a coat in the lobby. She put it on over what she was wearing, and she didn't take anything off underneath it. And she went up in the elevator in the same shoes she'd cleaned in the rain outside a bus terminal 9 days earlier. The room was on 22, and it had one long table in it, and every person around that table stood up when she came in, and not one of them looked at her face for longer than a second. Warren Kessler ran that meeting beautifully. He was warm about it. He said it was a relief to see her. He said the board's first obligation was to her well-being, and its second was to the company in that order, and there was no audible strain in any of it. Then Corinne Delaney read her statement, and it took under 2 minutes, and every sentence in it was true. She read it well, the way you read something you've been over. A woman on a sidewalk in torn gray clothing, hair unwashed, approaching strangers to ask for food. She got to the end of the page and did not turn it over because there wasn't a second page, and she sat down. Nobody at that table asked her a single question about it. That is worth noticing. 12 people had just heard a description of a colleague of 19 years standing on a corner asking for bread, and not one of them asked whether anybody had gone down there. The chair, a woman named Judith Farrow, asked whether Miss Vandermeer wished to respond. Elise said she'd like to ask about the filing. What came out over the next 4 minutes was this. The petition, the one that asked the board to record her as absent and unable to direct the company's affairs, had not come from a family member. It had not come from outside counsel. Warren Kessler had signed and filed it himself. He had filed it on the 9th of September. The search team he had described to that same board, the one he had told them he was personally coordinating, was not constituted until the 21st. 12 days. He had not been looking for her for 12 days. He had been waiting to see whether anyone would find her. Judith Farrow asked him to clarify the dates and gave him every chance to, and he clarified them accurately because they were accurate. Then Elise put 2 things on the table. The first was a notebook with a taped spine. She read out 4 entries. A company fleet vehicle identified not by its plate, which anyone could copy, but by the asset number stamped low on the rear quarter panel, which is the sort of thing only a person who works on cars for a living ever looks at. 4th and Belmont, under the freeway on Vane. The lot behind the Mission on 62nd. The Mission on 62nd again. All 4 in the weeks before the 21st. All 4 in places people sleep when they have nowhere. The second thing was smaller. It was a business card. Terry Boyd had come up in the elevator with them and had not expected to speak, and when Judith Farrow asked him a direct question, he stood up because his father would have. He spoke to the board. He did not look at Kessler at any point. He handed me his card on a Tuesday, wrote the date on the back himself. He put it down on the table and slid it across face down so the writing was showing. His paperwork says nobody could find her that week. He sat back down. One of those 2 things is a typo. Judith Farrow picked the card up. She looked at the front of it, and then she turned it over and looked at the back for a good deal longer than she had looked at the front. Then she passed it to the man on her left, and he passed it on, and it went around that table the whole way, 12 people, one after another, each of them handling a piece of cardstock with a date on it. Nobody said anything while it traveled. The only sound in the room was a chair. Warren Kessler did not argue. He stood and he buttoned his jacket and he thanked the board for 19 years and he asked to be excused. Judith Farrow excused him. Elise Vandermeer did not say one word to him. She did not turn her head when he passed behind her chair. 2 people from the building walked him out down the same corridor he had walked her along on her first morning as chair, past the same windows at the same unhurried pace. The door at the end closed the way every door in that building closed, quietly, and nobody heard it. She came to the garage on Friday in a navy coat, and she brought an envelope. Terry shook his head before she'd finished setting it down. I told you the rule. You did. Then you know I'm not. Open it. He opened it. It was not a check, it was not a fund or a trust or a scholarship or anything with his daughter's name on it. It was a request for proposals. Fleet maintenance and inspection city vehicles 3-year term. 3 shops invited to bid, sealed submissions, market rate. His shop was one of 3. You'll have to underbid 2 outfits with more bays than you. She pushed the packet across the cold bench with 2 fingers. And you'll have to beat them on price, not on story. Terry read the first page twice. Then he asked the only question he actually needed answered. The rent. What happened to the money? Return to the fund it came out of. On Thursday afternoon, she said it evenly, the way you'd report the weather. Which means you owe your landlord $14,600 exactly the way you did 9 days ago. The only difference is you have 5 years to pay it in at the rate on the other man's notice. Terry sat down on the crate and laughed once with no humor in it at all. You could have just paid it, he said. You know that. I could have. She looked around the first bay while she answered at the pegboard at the crates against the back wall with the diamonds stamped into them. And every morning after that, you'd have opened this door knowing who paid for it. You gave me a sandwich when you had $41, Terry. I'm not going to hand you back something that makes that smaller. He sat with that a while. Then he put his hand out and took the packet. He signed the bid on the 9th day. His deadline was the 11th. Friday night, upstairs, the 3 of them at the kitchen table. Nobody mentioned the 22nd floor. Nobody mentioned Kessler then or after. There was a loaf on a board in the middle of the table. Zuri picked it up in both hands and broke it in half. She gave half to Elise. And Elise took it with both hands the way a person takes something they had decided a long time ago and very carefully that they were never going to be given again. 6 weeks later, a truck slowed at the light on Halstead, and from the cab you could see the whole corner. The roll-up door of the shop was up. There were 2 notices taped to it. One for a 5-year term at the rate on the paper, and one for a fleet contract awarded on a sealed bid, and neither of them was about to be taken down. Somebody was standing at the curb. Not the same woman, somebody else. A man this time in a coat that had gone at the shoulder, holding his hands in front of him because he had run out of things to do with them. Terry Boyd came out of the second bay wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't ask the man's name. He didn't ask him anything. He went back inside and he came out with a loaf. Charity is what you give a stranger. Dignity is what you refuse to take from them. If a stranger asked you for bread tonight, not money, just bread, would you go back for her in the rain? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this one stayed with you, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn the bell on so the next story finds you. Until then, take care of yourself and feed somebody.